I'm Lisa Bennett, 31 years old, communications consultant, Manhattan-based, independent, and, according to my mother, still tragically alone. Today, I stood in front of the mirror in my Brooklyn apartment, smoothing out the soft emerald green satin of my dress. It hugged my body in all the right places. Classy, elegant, confident, or at least I hoped I looked that way. Inside, my nerves were crawling. My cousin Amanda's wedding was being held at the Astoria Garden Club, one of those fairy tale venues with chandeliers and real orchids flown in from somewhere tropical. My whole extended family would be there, and I would be walking in solo. I had debated not going. Really, the invitation had arrived 2 months ago, addressed formally, Lisa Bennett plus guest, like a gentle slap in the face. As if the universe wanted to remind me I'd just ended a 6-year relationship that should have ended at year 2. But I wasn't going to let them see me broken. The moment I walked in, conversations dipped. Aunt Margie, holding a mimosa with too much pulp, elbowed Uncle Ray. She came alone. I heard her say, not even bothering to whisper. Poor Lisa, such a shame. 31 and not even dating? I didn't flinch. I've trained myself not to. But inside, that old sting returned. From across the room, I caught Mom's sigh before I even saw her. She was standing with her signature glass of white wine and that soft look of pity she always wore like pearls. She'll never find someone, she said to no one and everyone. She works too much. Men don't like women like that. I smiled politely, nodded at a few people, and made my way to the bar. The bartender didn't even ask. Just handed me a Prosecco like he'd seen it a dozen times. The single woman's survival glass. You know that moment when your whole life plays in your head and you ask yourself, how did I end up here? That was me, perched on the edge of a cream velvet bar stool, nursing overpriced bubbles while watching Amanda, the cousin whose biggest accomplishment was marrying rich, bask in the glow of everyone's approval. Aunt Susan passed behind me and patted my shoulder. Still no +1? Well, you know, Lisa, some people just aren't meant to find love. But you've always had your career. I turned away, gripping the stem of my glass so tightly it might have snapped. I didn't always feel this way. There was a time I believed in partnership, in a future, in love. But my ex, Daniel, taught me how naive I'd been. 6 years of my life invested. 6. I stood by him through job loss, depression, career changes, and a whole year when he couldn't decide what he wanted. And then, when I finally landed a dream client and started getting noticed professionally, he couldn't handle it. You're too much now, he said. Too independent. I miss when you needed me. Translation: I don't like watching you become more than I am. He left a month later, for someone who got him better. And now, here I was, at a family wedding, surrounded by judgmental glances, forced smiles, and passive-aggressive pity. The ceremony was scheduled to start in 10 minutes. Most of the guests were already seated. I hadn't dared go inside yet. That's when Kimberly, my younger sister, approached. Perfect Kimberly. The one who married at 24, had 2 kids by 28, and lived in a house with a white fence in Connecticut like it was an HGTV ad. Hey, Lisa, she said, offering a smile that didn't quite meet her eyes. Mom's been worried sick you wouldn't show. You know how she gets. Here I am, I replied, sipping my Prosecco. Alone, though? Her eyes scanned the room dramatically. No, date? I raised an eyebrow. No, just me. Kimberly's lips curled into a smirk. Well, it's brave. Some women would have stayed home. I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled. That's what years of conditioning does. You master the art of silent endurance. See you inside? She chirped, turning on her nude heels. And then, the doors to the venue flew open. Heads turned, and a man walked in like he owned every molecule of air in the room. Tailored charcoal suit, clean lines, presence like thunder wrapped in silk. He was tall, confident, and magnetic. The kind of man who didn't just enter a room. He rewrote its atmosphere. My heart stuttered. Whispers spread like wildfire. Who is that? Is that? He looks like... Then he walked straight toward me. Straight. Toward. Me. I blinked. And just before I could register what was happening, he took my hand gently, leaned in, and said loud enough for half the room to hear, "Let's not keep them waiting, sweetheart." And then he smiled. Like he knew exactly what he was doing. For a split second, I forgot how to breathe. His hand was warm, confident, and steady in mine. My first instinct was to pull away. But something in his expression, a mixture of quiet reassurance and deliberate intention, made me pause. "Let's not keep them waiting, sweetheart," he repeated, softer this time, just for me. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. All I could do was follow as he gently guided me away from the bar, across the polished wood floor, and straight into the center of the wedding venue. The room had fallen mostly silent. Guests shifted in their chairs. Heads swiveled. Whispers buzzed at low volume. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my mother's wine glass tilt midair, frozen in shock. Kimberly's jaw quite literally dropped. Amanda, still glowing in bridal perfection, stood near the arch, blinking in confusion. We stopped just inside the main aisle. And then he turned to face me, as if this were completely normal. As if we were just fashionably late to a wedding we were meant to attend together. I finally found my voice. Who are you?" He leaned in, speaking just beneath the volume of the whispers surrounding us. "Play along, just for a few minutes. I'll explain everything." I promise. I stared into his face. Square jaw, piercing gray-blue eyes, not a trace of hesitation. He looked like someone who had never fumbled a decision in his life. And for reasons I still can't explain, I nodded. He led me to the second row, where a few seats had been marked as reserved. The usher didn't even question it. The man nodded politely, and we were seated. Silence still lingered in the air. And then, almost on cue, the music resumed. Amanda's entrance music. Canon in D, because of course, wafted from the quartet, and the ceremony continued. I barely registered the words exchanged at the altar. My heart was pounding, my mind racing. I turned slightly toward him, whispering through clenched teeth. "Are you some kind of wedding crasher?" A smile tugged at the edge of his mouth. "Technically, no, I was invited. I just didn't RSVP. "Do I know you?" "No," he said. "But I know you, Lisa." I froze. "What?" "I recognized you the moment I walked in. You gave a keynote at the New York Brand Strategy Summit last October. Emotional clarity and crisis communication. You crushed it." I blinked, stunned. "You were there?" "In the front row." Of course, that conference was the one thing I'd truly been proud of in the last 2 years. I'd spoken in front of 500 people, and I remembered a man in the front row. Thought he looked vaguely familiar, but in the moment, I chalked it up to nerves. "And you just decided to walk into a wedding and pretend to be my date?" I asked. He leaned in again. "I heard your sister at the bar, the way she spoke about you. I don't like bullies, so I figured maybe today you could use someone in your corner." Before I could respond, the officiant said, "You may now kiss the bride." And polite applause spread through the room. I clapped numbly, my thoughts still trying to catch up to what had just happened. This stranger, this very attractive, well-dressed stranger, had walked into a social battlefield and picked a side. Mine. As the ceremony ended and people began filing out toward the reception hall, I whispered, "Okay, I'm going to need more than a mysterious hero complex. Who are you, really?" He stood and offered his arm. Sebastian Cole." The name hit me like a freight train. "You're the Sebastian Cole?" "Depends who you ask," he said with a wink. I nearly tripped over my heels. Sebastian Cole, tech entrepreneur, billionaire founder of Cole Innovations, regular on Forbes' Under 40 to Watch list. That Sebastian Cole. I remembered seeing his face on a cover once while waiting at a newsstand. The article headline had said something about him being brilliant, elusive, and impossibly private. And you just happened to be at my cousin's wedding? He grinned. Amanda's fiancé works for one of my subsidiaries. We had lunch last month, and he mentioned the wedding. When I heard the venue, I figured I might stop by and say a quick hello. Why didn't you tell anyone you were coming? He shrugged. I don't do well with a lot of attention or expectations, and I was going to leave until I saw you. We were at the edge of the ballroom now. The doors to the reception area stood open, revealing candlelit tables, a champagne tower, and guests gathering in curious clusters. Sebastian looked down at me. I can disappear right now if you want. Pretend none of this happened. I paused. The voices of judgment still echoed in my mind. My mother's sigh, Kimberly's smirk, Aunt Margie's commentary. Or I could walk in with Sebastian Cole. Let's not keep them waiting, I said quietly, echoing his earlier words. His smile widened. And together, we stepped into the ballroom, arm in arm under the stunned gazes of everyone who'd ever written me off. The moment we stepped into the ballroom, you could feel the air shift, not in a cinematic way, with gasps and dramatic music, but in that real way, when people suddenly stop mid-sentence and try to pretend they weren't just talking about you. Everyone was staring. My family, Amanda's bridesmaids, even the staff behind the buffet. And Sebastian? He didn't flinch. He owned the moment like it was another boardroom meeting. Calm, composed, and completely unbothered by the sea of eyes now glued to us. The wedding planner blinked twice when she saw us. She recovered quickly, gesturing toward the seating chart. Mr. Cole, we hadn't accounted for... Sebastian gave her a polite nod. Don't worry, Lisa and I will take care of it. He leaned toward me. Do you know where they put you? I bit the inside of my cheek. I was at table 19, the singles table, with cousin Donnie, my divorced great-uncle, and a girl who's in high school. Not ideal, he said dryly. He scanned the room until his eyes landed on Amanda's father, Uncle Gerald, who was deep in conversation near the head table. Sebastian gave him a slight nod. Gerald's eyes widened, and he motioned quickly to the wedding planner. Within seconds, someone was pulling an extra chair to a half-empty table near the front. VIP territory. And just like that, I was moved. Social upgrade complete. Sebastian pulled my chair out for me. After you, Ms. Bennett. I sat down slowly, still processing the absurdity of the moment. He took the seat beside me, adjusted his cufflinks, and leaned back like he belonged there. This man had turned a minefield of humiliation into a red carpet, and I hadn't even had a chance to understand why. So, I said, turning slightly toward him, let's go back to this whole play-along idea. How far are we taking this? He considered that. I figured we improvise, as long as you're comfortable. You do realize my entire family is going to interrogate you tonight? His lips curved. I've handled venture capital boards and congressional tech hearings. I think I can handle your Aunt Margie. I almost laughed, until I saw Kimberly approaching. She was smiling, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her gaze ping-ponged between me and Sebastian, like she was watching a tennis match she hadn't been invited to. Well, hello, stranger, she purred, clearly addressing him. You must be Lisa's guest? Sebastian stood politely and extended a hand. Sebastian Cole, pleasure to meet you. Kimberly's eyes flickered. Cole, that's a familiar name. He smiled. I get that a lot. She turned to me, expression faux casual. You never mentioned you were dating anyone, Lisa? I shrugged. We've been keeping it low-key. She tilted her head. How did you two meet? Sebastian didn't miss a beat. At the New York Brand Strategy Summit last fall, Lisa was a keynote speaker. Kimberly's eyebrows lifted. Oh? I was captivated, he said, locking eyes with me. Her approach to crisis communication was razor sharp. I introduced myself afterward and convinced her to grab a drink. Been trying to keep up with her ever since. My cheeks flushed. The worst part? It didn't feel like an act. Well, Kimberly said, voice tightening, I hope you have a strong backbone. Lisa's always been intense. Sebastian's smile sharpened just a little. I admire intensity. It's usually a sign of someone who knows what they want. I almost wanted to high-five him. Kimberly blinked, clearly not used to being outmaneuvered in casual conversation. I'm sure we'll talk more later, she said coolly before turning on her heel. When she was out of earshot, I exhaled slowly. You didn't have to do that. Do what? Defend me. Make it sound like I'm someone worth being proud of. He looked at me, and for the first time, his smile softened. I didn't make anything up, Lisa. Everything I said was true. The band started playing something jazzy in the background, and dinner began. Between bites of seared salmon and risotto, we fell into conversation. Real conversation. He asked about my job, how I'd built my freelance communications business after walking away from the PR agency world. I told him about clients who tried to underpay, media crises I'd diffused, and that moment I knew I'd made the right decision. Sitting alone on my floor at midnight, pizza in one hand, approval email in the other. And he listened. Really listened. He told me about his company, how Cole Innovations started in a college dorm room, how his father didn't speak to him for a year after he dropped out, how success came quickly, but peace took much longer. And just like that, the man in the suit became someone real, human, fallible. Halfway through dessert, Sebastian leaned in and said, By the way, you've got at least 4 people staring at you like they've just realized you're not invisible. I looked around. He wasn't wrong. Kimberly was watching. So was Aunt Margie. And my mom, who'd spent the last decade lamenting my dating life, was now whispering behind her napkin like I'd become royalty overnight. They're shocked, I said quietly. They're seeing a version of me they didn't think existed. Sebastian touched my hand lightly. Maybe it's time they met the real version. For the first time in years, I wasn't shrinking to fit their comfort. I was finally expanding into my own story. Later that evening, after the cake had been cut and the first dances were over, the music shifted into something slow and sweeping. The lights dimmed to a golden glow, and couples began migrating to the dance floor like moths to warm light. Sebastian stood and extended his hand. Shall we? I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, but because it had been years since I danced with someone who looked at me like I mattered. Still, I slid my hand into his and let him lead me to the floor. The band played something classic. Frank Sinatra, I think, but I barely registered the lyrics. All I could focus on was the feel of his hand at my waist, the way his other hand held mine like it was the most natural thing in the world. He wasn't flashy or showy. He just moved with quiet confidence. We found a rhythm almost immediately, a slow, easy back and forth that somehow felt like we'd done this before. You're surprisingly good at this, I said, breaking the silence. He chuckled. Mandatory lessons at boarding school. My mother believed every gentleman should know how to waltz and how to apologize properly. Did she teach you the latter too? She tried, he said, his smile faltering for the first time all evening. We danced in silence for a few more seconds. Then I asked, Do you always do this? Do what? Rescue random women at weddings? He looked down at me. Only when they look like they're about to combust from emotional damage. I laughed despite myself. That obvious? He nodded, unashamed. You walked in with your spine straight, chin up, pretending not to notice the dozens of eyes dissecting you. That takes guts. It takes practice, I corrected. We kept moving. I felt a twinge in my chest, the kind of ache that comes when someone sees you more clearly than you're ready for. I've spent most of my adult life trying to prove something to my family, I admitted. That I'm not broken because I didn't get married by 28. That I'm not lesser because I chose career over kids. But no matter how much I achieve, I'm still poor Lisa in their eyes. Sebastian didn't respond right away. He just kept leading the dance, giving me time to breathe through the emotion behind my words. Then, softly, he said, "They're wrong, you know. Every word they've ever said about you that made you feel small, that's their fear talking, not truth." I looked up, surprised at the firmness in his voice. "You can always tell when people aren't comfortable with someone who knows who they are," he added. Before I could respond, someone tapped him on the shoulder. It was Amanda's new husband, Jason, I think. He looked nervous, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Sorry to interrupt. Sebastian, can I borrow you for a second? Something with the payment system for the venue. We're locked out of the app and—" Sebastian gave me an apologetic glance. "Business emergencies follow me everywhere." He kissed my hand, a move that would have felt corny from anyone else, and turned to go with Jason. As I walked off the dance floor, I found myself face to face with my mother. She held a nearly empty glass of Chardonnay and a purse clutched tightly under one arm. Her eyes scanned me from head to toe. "Well," she said slowly, "that was quite the performance." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "Sebastian Cole?" she said, tone skeptical. "I Googled him during dinner. Do you really expect us to believe you're dating one of the most private men in America? You've never mentioned him. Not once. Because I don't report my love life to the family gossip circle." Her eyebrows rose. "So he's real?" I folded my arms. "Yes, Mom, he's real." She sighed like I'd disappointed her by breathing. "Just be careful, Lisa. Men like that, they don't settle down with women like you." I felt the words like a slap. Women like me. She meant ordinary, real, flawed. "I think we're done with this conversation," I said, turning away before she could see the tears threatening to surface. I stepped out onto the patio for air. The night had cooled, the air crisp with the scent of autumn. A string of white lights twinkled above, and for a few blessed minutes, I was alone. Until Kimberly appeared beside me, arms crossed. "Well," she said, voice light but barbed. "Congratulations." I said nothing. "He seems very convincing," she continued. "You even had Aunt Margie believing it." I turned to face her. "Do you ever get tired of this? The snide comments, the constant digs. What exactly do you gain from making me feel small?" Kimberly rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, don't play the victim." "I'm not playing anything," I said quietly. "I'm just done shrinking so you can shine." For once, she didn't have a comeback. Sebastian reappeared then, walking onto the patio like a man who belonged everywhere. He slipped an arm around my waist and kissed the side of my head. "You okay?" he asked softly. I nodded, and for the first time in years, I realized I meant it. We re-entered the ballroom just as the DJ invited everyone to the dance floor for what he called a moment of celebration for all the couples in the room. Sebastian kept his arm casually around me, his body warm against mine. We didn't dance this time. We just watched from the edge of the floor as couples twirled and laughed and leaned into each other like they'd known love all their lives. I watched them, feeling a complicated swirl of emotions, longing, admiration, and something dangerously close to envy. Sebastian leaned in. "What are you thinking?" "That this is the kind of night I usually spend alone," I admitted, "and that I don't know how to trust what's happening right now." He studied me for a moment. "It doesn't have to be anything more than what it is." "And what is it?" I asked. He paused. Two people who saw something in each other and decided not to ignore it. We were interrupted by Aunt Margie, who approached holding a flute of champagne and wearing her usual cloud of perfume. "Well, well, well," she said, with a tone that suggested she thought she'd caught us mid-scheme. "Lisa, you didn't tell us you were dating someone quite so accomplished." Sebastian turned on the charm. "I'm the lucky one, actually. Lisa's brilliance is what caught my eye first. I've been trying to keep up ever since." Aunt Margie's eyes narrowed, clearly thrown. "How long have you two been an item?" "About 3 months," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Really?" she asked, too brightly. Interesting that no one in the family had any idea. especially since Lisa always said she wanted to take her time before getting serious again. After Daniel, of course. I stiffened at the mention of his name. Sebastian's eyes flicked to me for a brief second, then back to Margie. Some connections don't operate on timelines, he said gently. They either work or they don't. Well, Aunt Margie said, defeated but unwilling to show it. We'll see how long this one lasts. As she floated away, I exhaled. She's been like that since I was 12. Sebastian looked at me carefully. Can I ask you something? I nodded. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I wasn't completely honest about how I knew you'd be here tonight. I froze. What do you mean? He handed me the paper. I opened it slowly, fingers trembling. It was a printed guest list, Amanda's, on official wedding letterhead. My name circled in red ink. I didn't just show up by coincidence, he admitted. Jason, Amanda's husband, works at one of my firms. We had lunch last week. He mentioned the wedding and your name came up. He mentioned you were coming alone. My stomach dropped. So what? This was some kind of mission? No, he said quickly. Not like that. When I heard your name, it rang a bell. I remembered the conference. I remembered how you spoke, how confident and sharp you were. I'd meant to reach out back then, but the timing never worked. When I realized you'd be here, I thought, maybe I'd get a second chance. A second chance to what? I asked, voice low. To introduce myself, to meet you without a stage between us. I folded the list. And the dramatic entrance? He smiled sheepishly. Okay, I didn't plan that. I was going to leave, actually. I got cold feet. But then I saw your mom. I overheard what she said. He didn't need to repeat it. I knew the exact line. Poor thing, she'll never find someone. I saw your face, and I just walked in, he said. It was impulsive and probably stupid, but not fake. I sat down on the edge of a chair, trying to process everything. It's a lot, I know, he said. But nothing I told you tonight was a lie. I didn't plan on pretending. I planned on asking you for coffee. Somehow it turned into this. And what is this, Sebastian? I asked, looking up at him. Because it feels like I'm not sure what's real anymore. He crouched beside me. This is real, he said. At least for me. The way I've watched you hold yourself tonight, graceful, self-possessed, funny, you've handled a room full of judgment with more class than I've seen from board members twice your age. My heart thudded in my chest. Part of me wanted to believe him. The other part remembered how quickly affection could be manufactured. I'd been tricked before, loved by people who didn't mean it, believed in relationships that were built on control, not connection. Before I could respond, Kimberly appeared again, this time with that look on her face, the one that said she knew something I didn't. Hey, Lisa, she said, all false sweetness. You've got a moment? I think you should come see something. Sebastian stood. We're kind of in the middle of something. It'll only take a second, she interrupted. Really, Lisa, you'll want to see this. I followed her reluctantly, heart pounding, gut sinking. She led me through the hallway toward the coat check area, then turned abruptly and faced me. You're going to hate me, she said, pulling out her phone. What is this? She opened a tab on Safari, a news article. Billionaire Sebastian Cole makes surprise appearance at private event, spotted with unidentified woman at family wedding. A photo, from tonight, of me and Sebastian at the bar. What is this? I whispered. Kimberly shrugged. Guess you weren't as private as you thought. I looked at the timestamp. 20 minutes ago, someone had leaked it. My chest tightened. Why are you showing me this? Her expression turned sharp. Because you should ask yourself something, Lisa. Was this about you, or about the story? My mind reeled. Had I just been part of a well-orchestrated narrative? Or worse, a headline. I stood in that dim hallway, staring at the photo on Kimberly's phone. There I was, mid-laugh, a champagne glass in hand with Sebastian Cole's arm around my waist. And below it, billionaire makes surprise appearance at private NYC wedding. Unidentified woman may be a new mystery partner. And a few speculative headlines beneath that. My stomach turned. Why are you showing me this? I asked again, voice colder now. Kimberly tilted her head, her voice calm and saccharine. Because you needed to know. You've been so wrapped up in your Cinderella moment, I thought you deserved to see what it looks like from the outside. You think he did this? I asked, breath catching. That he staged this? For what? Attention? Kimberly shrugged, but there was something gleaming in her eyes. All I'm saying is, maybe ask yourself why someone like him would suddenly want to play your boyfriend at a wedding. In front of cameras. On the same weekend his new tech deal launches. Think about it. I walked away before I said something I'd regret. Back in the ballroom, the music was louder, the dancing more chaotic, but I could only see one face in the crowd. Sebastian. He was standing near the bar, scrolling through his phone. His brow furrowed, jaw tight. He'd seen it too. I walked straight up to him. We need to talk, now. He looked up, registering my expression instantly. Lisa? Did you know this would happen? No, he said firmly. Not like this. But you did know there was a chance someone might see us. Might post something. Yes, he admitted. But I didn't think it would happen so fast. And I didn't plan it. That photo? That leak? Not me. Then who? I asked. Because I've spent this entire night defending something I wasn't even sure was real. And now I find myself in a tabloid captioned as unidentified woman, like I'm part of some PR stunt. I'm sorry, he said, and he meant it. I could see it in his eyes. But this doesn't work for me, I said quietly. I can't be someone's moment. I've spent too many years being an afterthought, a stepping stone, or a placeholder. If this was a story for you, even a good one, I don't want it. Sebastian stepped forward. Lisa, I didn't come here for publicity. I came here because I remembered a woman who stood on a stage and said things that made me rethink how I communicate with the world. Because when Jason mentioned your name, something clicked, and I thought, maybe that moment in October wasn't supposed to be the end of it. I swallowed, hard. But you didn't give me a choice. You stepped into my life without asking. You walked in, hand outstretched, and I followed you, because I was desperate not to feel small. His voice softened. You were never small. I know that now, I said. But I had to learn it the hard way. He nodded, stepping back. If you ask me to leave, I will. But I hope you won't. I didn't fake what I felt tonight, Lisa. Not the way I looked at you. Not the way we danced. And definitely not the way I'll remember this moment. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. So he turned, slow and sure, and walked out of the ballroom. And just like that, the moment ended. I didn't cry. I didn't chase him. I just stood there, strangely calm, as if something inside me had finally clicked into place. I left an hour later, with no dramatic farewell, no goodbyes. Just a quiet walk out into the cool New York night. The air tasted like endings. And maybe, just maybe, new beginnings too. 3 weeks passed. No texts, no calls. I got back to work. Signed a new client. Reorganized my apartment. Went on a solo hike upstate and cried at the top of a trail for no particular reason other than knowing I could. Then one Thursday morning, a small package arrived at my office. No return address. Inside was a single object. A paperback book with a worn spine. Daring Greatly by Brené Brown. Tucked inside was a handwritten note. Because you did. S. I stared at it for a long time, unsure whether to laugh or cry. In the end, I did both. 2 months later, we crossed paths again. Not planned, not staged. I was speaking at another conference, this time in Chicago. Afterward, I was answering questions at the edge of the stage when I saw him in the crowd. No suit, no cameras, just jeans, a jacket, and that same look in his eyes. When the crowd dispersed, he walked up and said, "Coffee this time?" I nodded. No pretending. He smiled. No headlines. And this time, when I reached for his hand, it was on my terms. 6 months later, I brought him to another family wedding. But this time, no performance, no drama. Just us. Two people who had learned to stop apologizing for who they were. And when my mother whispered, "You look happy," I simply said, "I am." Because I was. Not because of him, but because somewhere along the way, I stopped waiting to be chosen. And finally chose myself. I'm Jessica Lang, 32 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've worn a label I never asked for. The family disappointment. Not the rebel. Not the failure. Just the one who never quite lived up to the expectations everyone else seemed to slide into so easily. My younger sister Claire, on the other hand? She's the golden one. The one who always made everything look effortless. Glowing grades, perfect skin, charming smile, and a way of making people fall in love with her in 10 minutes or less. Where I was overlooked, she was celebrated. Where I was told to work harder, she was called gifted. We're only 2 years apart, but it always felt like we lived on opposite sides of the same mirror. Growing up in northern Connecticut, our family looked picture perfect from the outside. Dad was a corporate attorney. Mom ran a small but successful interior design firm. We had the house with the hydrangeas and the golden retriever. But behind closed doors, everything was about image. And image was Claire's specialty. Me? I liked books. I liked coding. I liked asking too many questions. And by the time I was 15, I had already figured out that attention in our family was earned through perfection, or performance. And I was too exhausted to fake either. I remember one Christmas, I gave my parents a photo album I had made by hand, scanning old family pictures, adding personal captions, printing and binding it myself. Claire gave them designer towels she had picked out with Mom during a shopping trip. Guess which one made it onto Facebook? But I never resented her for it. Not really. Because the truth is, I loved her. I defended her. I cheered for her. I just slowly learned to cheer more quietly. From the sidelines. Still, I tried. I went to college, got my degree in computer science, landed a job at a tech firm in Boston. I thought maybe if I built something of my own, if I achieved success outside of their view, I could earn a different kind of respect. Not the loud kind, but the quiet kind that sinks in and stays. But every time I came home, it was like none of it mattered. How's work, Claire? Oh, amazing, Mom. They're letting me design the whole campaign. Applause. How's work, Jess? Still at the same place. Polite nods. Quick subject change. So when Claire got engaged to her college sweetheart, a finance guy named Ryan with symmetrical teeth and symmetrical morals, the whole family lit up. Mom immediately went into Pinterest overdrive. Dad offered to pay for the wedding. And suddenly, every family dinner was about floral arrangements, dress fittings, and destination bachelorette plans. I smiled. I said congratulations. I bought her the champagne. I even helped her design the invites, because, of course, she wanted them to have a touch of personality. And then came the bridal shower. It was hosted at our family home, catered, color-coded, complete with a donut wall that spelled out Claired. Everyone was there. Relatives, co-workers, childhood friends who barely knew her anymore. And when it was time for the toast to the bride, Claire stood in the center of the living room like it was her coronation day. She held up her glass, smiling sweetly. I just want to say how grateful I am. For everyone who believed in me. For everyone who supported me. Especially my family. I know I haven't always been easy. She gave a fake little laugh, eyes darting to me for a beat. But hey, at least I'm not the family disappointment anymore. Laughter. Real, audible laughter. And then clapping. Even Mom clapped. That moment, that single sentence, and landed like a punch I didn't see coming. I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I just stood up. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, walked over to Claire, and dropped it in her lap. From one disappointment to another, I said, voice calm, heart pounding. Congratulations. And then I walked out. I didn't stay to watch her open it. I didn't need to. I already knew what was inside, and I knew what would happen the second she saw it. But I also knew this. Sometimes the best revenge isn't loud or cruel. It's controlled and timed. I didn't drive straight home after the bridal shower. My hands were shaking too much to hold the wheel. So I pulled into the first empty church parking lot I found and sat there for a long time. Engine off, head resting on the steering wheel, breath shallow. I kept hearing the laughter. That clap-track applause. My mother's smile. My sister's smug little joke that landed like a slap wrapped in a satin bow. But more than that, I kept thinking about the velvet box. It wasn't just some dramatic stunt. It had meaning. Real meaning. And that's probably what made it hit so hard. See, what Claire didn't know, what no one knew actually, was that the item inside the box wasn't new. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't shiny. It was a key. A simple, worn, silver key. It had once belonged to my grandmother, Dad's mother, who lived alone in a modest yellow house on the edge of Manchester. I used to visit her every summer until she passed when I was 18. She was the only person in the family who made me feel seen. Not tolerated, not managed, just seen. She taught me how to braid garlic, how to balance a checkbook, how to listen when someone's words didn't match their eyes. And before she died, she called me into her room, thin, tired, but still sharp as ever, and handed me a small box. "This is for you," she said. "The house is going to your father, but the key? That's different. What's inside is yours." I remember looking at the key like it was treasure. Because to me, it was. After her funeral, Dad sold the house in under 3 months. Said maintaining an old place like that didn't make financial sense. I wasn't even consulted. I was 18 and invisible, so I didn't argue. But what no one knew was that I'd spent the summer before her passing helping her clear out the attic. And during those quiet afternoons, she showed me something she never showed anyone else. An old wooden trunk. Inside were her journals, letters, a few antique brooches, receipts from the cafe she owned before she got married, and one brown envelope labeled, "For Jess, when they make you forget who you are." I never opened it. I just kept it. For 12 years, that envelope sat untouched in a safe deposit box under my name. I wasn't ready then. I didn't even know what kind of forgetting she meant. Until Claire stood in front of that room and cracked a joke that said everything they'd all been too polite to say out loud for years. "You are the disappointment. You've always been the disappointment." That's when I knew. The box needed to be opened. And not just by me. So before the bridal shower, I took the envelope from the safe deposit box. I put it, unopened, inside that velvet ring box Claire had once thrown at me in high school during a fight. And I added the key on top, tucked inside the satin interior. The same key my grandmother once placed in my hand like it was sacred. That's what Claire found when she opened it. Not revenge. History. A truth she never bothered to learn. A few hours later, after my hands finally stopped shaking, I drove home to my apartment in Boston. It was nearly midnight when I walked in. My phone had been buzzing nonstop since 6:45 p.m. Mom, Dad, Claire, even Ryan. I didn't answer any of them, but I read the texts. Claire, "What the hell is this?" Mom, "Jessica, you embarrassed your sister in front of everyone." Dad, "Call me. Now." Ryan, "That was messed up. Totally inappropriate. You ruined her moment." Only one text made me pause. Claire again, 20 minutes later. "Where did you get that letter?" She hadn't even said there was a letter, but that text confirmed it. She had opened the envelope, which meant the real bomb had already gone off, because I knew what was inside that letter. I hadn't read it, but I knew. My grandmother never used words lightly. Whatever was written in those pages was meant to rattle something awake, maybe even burn a few illusions to the ground. And Claire? She'd built her whole identity on illusion. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone still in hand, staring at that last message. Then I wrote back. Now you know who the real disappointment was. I didn't wait for a reply. Instead, I reached under my bed, pulled out an old storage box, and began sorting through the rest of my grandmother's belongings. Because something told me this was just the beginning. That secrets never stay buried forever. Not when someone finally dares to open the box. And I had a feeling Claire wasn't the only one who needed to be reminded of that. The next morning, I woke up to 14 missed calls. Claire had tried twice. My mother 5 times. My dad, who normally only called for major holidays or legal advice, had called 4 times. Even Ryan had tried once more, though I deleted that voicemail before I could hear his full tone of fake concern. I didn't feel regret. Just something heavier. Something older. The kind of weight that doesn't come from one night, but from decades of playing the role no one admits they cast you in. I made coffee, sat in silence, and finally opened my laptop. I had emails to answer, but I couldn't focus on code. Not today. My brain kept circling back to one question. What exactly did my grandmother write in that letter? Because when Claire asked, "Where did you get that letter?" I knew it had shaken her. The kind of shake Claire didn't admit easily. She had always been the type to laugh off confrontation, spin pain into passive aggression, and dismiss emotions as weakness. So for her to send that message, it meant she had read something that cracked her version of the story. Around noon, I got a text from an unknown number. "Jessica, it's Aunt Deborah. Your mother gave me your number. Claire is beside herself. What did you put in that box?" I didn't answer, but I did search through the storage box under my bed, pulling out everything that had once belonged to my grandmother. The old birth certificates, clipped newspaper articles, the deed to the house, even the faded menu from the cafe she ran in the 70s. And then I found it. Another letter. This one wasn't in an envelope. It was folded into quarters and tucked behind a photograph of her standing with a man I didn't recognize. On the back of the photo, in my grandmother's neat cursive, were the words, 1968, Arthur. The truth I never told Daniel. Daniel was my father. I hesitated, then opened the letter. "Jessica, if you're reading this, then you've reached a point in life where being invisible has become unbearable. I'm sorry it took you this long to get here. I wish I had been around to help you navigate this sooner. But if nothing else, let me give you this. There are truths your father never knew. Truths I never told because I thought protecting his pride mattered more than protecting your worth. Your father always wanted a son who would reflect his ambition. He got 2 daughters instead, one of them being me. And later, when he had children of his own, he projected all his insecurities onto you. Not because you were weak, but because you were strong. Too strong to play the game the way Claire did. He never knew how to handle girls who didn't smile when told to. That's not your fault. That's his fear. I saw so much of myself in you. The fire, the stubbornness, the ability to stand in the storm without bending. And I knew that one day, they would try to break you. With silence. With coldness. With comparison. That's how emotional control works. It doesn't shout. It whispers, "You're not enough." But you are. You always were. And if you ever doubt that again, remember this. Nothing powerful ever grows in comfort. Diamonds form under pressure. Rockets launch against gravity. You are not a disappointment. You are a reckoning. With love, Grandma May. I didn't realize I was crying until my coffee had gone cold in my hands. The words didn't just speak to the present. They explained the past. They gave shape to a wound I had carried without ever understanding how it had formed. And suddenly, I understood why Claire had screamed when she read her letter. because inside her envelope was likely something just as personal, just as pointed. I didn't know the exact content, not yet, but I knew my grandmother. She didn't write words without intention. She didn't leave weapons. She left mirrors. And maybe that's what scared Claire the most, seeing a version of herself she had spent years avoiding. Around 4 p.m., Claire sent another message. Why would she write that to me? This time, I answered, maybe because she knew one day you'd need to hear it. A full hour passed before her reply came. I don't know what to do with it. I stared at the screen, then typed back, you don't have to do anything, just don't pretend it doesn't exist. Because for once in our lives, it wasn't about performance, or applause, or who's the golden one and who's the failure. It was about the truth. And once truth is opened, like a letter, like a box, it never really fits back into silence. 2 days after the bridal shower, I showed up at my parents' house unannounced. Not out of guilt, not even to make peace. I just needed answers. Mom opened the door like she was expecting someone else. When she saw it was me, her mouth tightened into that familiar, thin-lipped line, the one she always used when trying to stay polite in front of guests. Jessica, she said, we weren't expecting. I know. I cut her off gently. I just want to talk. With both of you. Dad was in the kitchen, nursing a glass of bourbon like it was medicinal. He barely looked up when I entered, just gestured toward a chair and said, sit, if you're staying. Mom followed behind me, visibly tense, as though I might explode again. Like I had at the bridal shower. As if honesty were dynamite. For a few seconds, no one spoke. I could hear the refrigerator humming, the ice shifting in my father's glass. Then I said it. She screamed because I gave her something real. For once. Dad looked up slowly. You humiliated your sister? No, I said, steady. She humiliated herself. I just stopped playing along. He exhaled, loud. You always were so dramatic. Mom flinched, just barely. And in that tiny gesture, I saw everything she never said out loud. The years of standing just off stage, silently supporting, never interfering, never protecting. Do you even know what was in the envelope? I asked him. He didn't answer. Of course he didn't. They never asked what I carried, only how they looked. I've spent years thinking there was something wrong with me, I continued. That maybe I was too much, or not enough. That if I had just tried harder, been sweeter, smiled more, I would have been allowed to matter, like Claire. You do matter, Mom said too quickly. We've always loved you. You loved the version of me that didn't make things uncomfortable, I said. That stayed quiet at family dinners. That clapped for Claire and said thank you when you gave me birthday cards with $20 bills instead of conversations. Dad sat up straighter. We supported you just the same. No, you tolerated me, I corrected. Claire got pride. I got politeness. The words sat between us like smoke, curling through the room. Then Mom spoke again, softer this time. I read the letter, the one from your grandmother. Claire showed me. I turned to her. And? Her voice wavered. I think your grandmother saw what we didn't want to admit. That you didn't need applause. You needed to be seen, and we kept asking you to shrink. There it was. The sentence I'd waited decades for. Not an apology, but an acknowledgement. Dad stood up and walked to the sink, refilling his glass. Your grandmother always had a flair for the dramatic. That house was filled with old bitterness. No, I said, rising to meet his tone. It was filled with truth, the kind this family avoids like a plague. He turned, eyes hard. So what now, Jess? You want us to grovel? Rewrite history? Throw Claire under the bus for your validation? No, I said calmly. I want you to stop pretending everything's fine when it's not. I want you to understand that damage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the silence after you call someone a disappointment and expect them to smile anyway. For a moment, none of us moved. Then, from the hallway, came a voice I hadn't heard in 2 days. I asked her to give me the box. It was Claire. She stepped into the room wearing a hoodie and sweatpants. The first time I'd seen her not perfectly polished in, well, years. I told her to do something bold, she continued. I didn't know what she'd bring, but I asked for it. I said, if you want to be seen, then make them see you. Dad looked at her like she had lost her mind. You planned this? No, Claire said, but I provoked it. Because I knew she was about to disappear again, and I couldn't let her, not this time. My breath caught in my chest. Claire looked at me, and for once, the sarcasm was gone. The letter, it talked about how we both played our parts, how I played the perfect one to keep the peace, and how you were the mirror we kept trying to break. I nodded slowly. Turns out, she said, mirrors don't break that easy. We stood in that kitchen, the four of us, not yelling, not hugging, not healed, but cracked open, honest, and it was more than I had ever expected. Because sometimes change doesn't come in fireworks or dramatic scenes. Sometimes it comes in the moment a golden child admits the gold was only paint. 3 days after that kitchen confrontation, I got an invitation. Not a metaphorical one, a real one. Cream-colored cardstock, gold trim, sent by Claire. It was a new invite to her bridal shower do-over, as the note explained. This time, she wrote, no performance. Just the people who need to be in the room. I'd like you to be there, and I'd like you to speak, if you want to. I read the note 3 times before setting it down on my desk. It was surreal. Claire asking me to speak at her shower? The same Claire who used to roll her eyes when I corrected her grammar or asked too many nerdy questions at dinner? The same Claire who used to tell her friends I was just introverted when I disappeared into books at family parties? That Claire was shifting, but healing isn't linear. It doesn't arrive with one box and one confrontation. It unfolds in pieces, like slow-blooming truths. So, I didn't say yes right away. Instead, I sat on my balcony, watching the Boston skyline flicker in the early evening. And I thought about what I would even say, if I did go. Not revenge, not payback, but truth, the kind that's been earned. The next day, I called my grandmother's old neighbor, Mrs. O'Malley. She was nearly 90 now, but she still lived across the street from where Grandma May used to keep her yellow house, the one Dad sold like it was dead weight. Mrs. O'Malley answered on the 3rd ring. Jessica Lang, she said, her voice clear. You sound just like your grandmother. That nearly made me cry. She remembered the house, of course, and she remembered the summer I helped clean out the attic. You were the quiet one, she said, but not shy. There's a difference. I told her about the letter, the box, the fallout. She listened the way only the elderly can, with stillness, without trying to fix it. When I was done, she said, that house may be gone, but the stories inside it aren't. Sounds like your grandmother trusted you to carry them forward. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a disappointment. I felt like a torchbearer. A few days later, I showed up to Claire's new bridal shower. It wasn't held at our parents' house. It was hosted in a cozy cafe near the edge of the city, where the lighting was warm and the chairs mismatched in a way that felt real. There were maybe a dozen guests this time. No extended cousins, no coworkers who only came for the wine, no Instagram backdrops. Just people who mattered. Claire wore a soft blue dress, minimal makeup. No crown of flowers or perfectly rehearsed smile. She looked like a version of herself I hadn't seen since we were teenagers. She greeted me at the door with a long, quiet hug. I wasn't sure you'd come, she whispered. I wasn't either, I replied, but I'm glad I did. Halfway through the afternoon, after the cake was cut and people were sipping mimosas, Claire stood up. I know we did this already, she said, voice steady. And I know some of you heard things at the first shower that were unexpected. A few nervous chuckles followed. But I want to take a moment to acknowledge something. Or rather, someone. She looked straight at me. My sister Jessica, she said, has been many things in this family. Helper, fixer, protector, and yes, truth-teller. And for years I let her carry all the hard things while I performed the easy ones. But not anymore. She paused. Jess, would you mind saying a few words? The room turned toward me, and for a moment I felt that old weight rise again. The voice in my head whispering, don't stand out, don't make it weird, don't speak too loud. But I stood anyway. I walked to the center of the room and cleared my throat. Thank you, I began, for giving me a space I never expected to have. Not because I need a microphone or a spotlight, but because for a long time I believed I didn't belong in rooms like this. Family rooms, celebration rooms. The truth is, I wasn't the disappointment. I was just different. And different isn't a flaw. I looked at Claire, who was watching me without blinking. We all play roles, I said. Some we choose, some we inherit. But eventually, we get to decide whether we keep playing them. And I've decided to put mine down. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just spoke. Clearly, calmly, like someone who had finally stopped asking for permission to be seen. After the speech, something shifted in the air. Not dramatically. Not with applause or gasps or a teary standing ovation. It was quieter than that. A stillness. The kind that follows when something heavy finally lands and everyone realizes they've been holding their breath. Claire stood first. She didn't say anything. She just walked over and hugged me. Longer this time, with no whispers, no rehearsed sentiment. Just arms wrapped around arms. Real. Then one of her friends started clapping. Then another. And before I knew it, a slow, honest round of applause filled the room. Not for performance, but for release. For growth. For the courage it takes to say, I'm not who you thought I was. And that's okay. That night, after the guests had gone and the cafe lights were dimmed, Claire and I stayed behind to help the staff clean up. She insisted on wiping tables while I stacked used plates. It felt surreal. Us doing something together. Something normal, without the roles we'd both learned to play. She handed me a damp cloth. Do you want to know what was in my envelope? I paused. Only if you want to tell me. She leaned against the counter. It was a copy of an old letter Grandma wrote my dad. One she never sent. My brows lifted. To Dad? She nodded. She wrote it the day I was born. Apparently, she overheard him say he was relieved the second child was normal this time. That I wouldn't be difficult like you. My stomach tightened. I didn't know he said that. Neither did I, but Grandma did, and she called him a coward. Said any man who confuses silence for goodness is raising sheep, not children. I let out a quiet, bitter laugh. Sounds like her. Claire shrugged. She also wrote something else. That one day, the difficult one would be the only person in the family brave enough to face truth out loud. And that I'd either grow to resent it or respect it. And which did you choose? I asked. She met my eyes. I'm still choosing. It was the most honest answer I'd ever heard her give. As we walked out of the cafe, she handed me a small envelope. This was also in the box, she said. I think she meant it for both of us. I waited until I got home to open it. Inside was a single photograph. Old, faded, edges curled. It was of Grandma May holding two babies, one in each arm. Claire and me. She was laughing, her head thrown back, hair a mess, eyes squinting in the sunlight. On the back, she had written in blue pen, "Let the world call you difficult. It means you didn't bend. Stay upright." I placed the photo in my bookshelf, tucked behind a frame of my college graduation, the one no one in my family attended. Not out of spite, but as a reminder. Because healing doesn't mean rewriting history. It means reframing it. And I had finally done that. Claire's wedding was held 4 weeks later. It wasn't perfect. There were awkward silences at the rehearsal dinner, tension between our dad and me that never quite resolved. Mom stayed mostly neutral, walking a careful line between peacemaker and passenger. But Claire? She was different. Her vows were raw. Her gratitude was real. And during the reception, during the speeches, she raised a glass and said, "To my sister, who showed me that some legacies are worth breaking." I didn't cry then. I just nodded. Because that moment wasn't about being forgiven or celebrated. It was about being understood. And for someone who'd spent her entire life explaining herself to people who had already made up their minds, that was everything. Weeks later, back in Boston, I was asked to speak on a podcast about women in tech. The host asked me about failure, imposter syndrome, and where I found my confidence. I told the truth. Confidence isn't the absence of doubt, I said. It's the refusal to let other people's versions of you win. She asked where I'd learned that. And I smiled, thinking of a velvet box, a key, and a letter written by a woman who saw me before anyone else dared to. From the disappointment, I said. The one who didn't stay quiet. So if you're still watching, still wondering what was in that box, maybe this is your sign. To stop shrinking. To stop apologizing for being the one who didn't fit their mold. Because sometimes the biggest gift you'll ever give is the truth. Wrapped in velvet, delivered with grace, and left behind with your head held high.